What are some of the factors that you think people can work on and change and modify within themselves that will help them be more successful?
Well, I think learning to take pleasure in the success of those around you, and to seek it, and to work on it, and to learn to give, and to actually enjoy giving. That's really important. I think people who can't do that, there's like a natural cap on them in life, and most of them. I think that's one.
Welcome to the MAXIMUS podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Cam Sapa. As a clinical psychologist, medical school professor, and CEO, I specialize in helping men be better in mind, body, and masculinity. On this podcast, I interview extraordinary men as a clinician would, hearing their come-up stories of how they became the men that they are today, and having them share their secrets of actionable advice on how to look, feel, and perform your best. All right, welcome Maximizers. We're back on the Maximus podcast with Joe Lonsdale, who was the founder of 8VC, Adipar, and Palantir. On our last segment, Making the Man, we got to hear the story of Joe's entrepreneurial and investing journey. And in this segment, Actionable Advice, we're going to hear a little bit more about the daily habits and health behaviors that Joe uses to continue to be a very high-performing person and professional. So I know there's no typical day. And I think one time, in fact, when I met with you, you talked about being in 14 meetings that day, which I was quite impressed by. But can you walk me through kind of like what a typical day looks like in your schedule?
Well, it really depends. Usually there's some kind of workout in the morning with either somebody who works for me or one of our CEOs, or maybe someone in town who I wanted to see and work out and have breakfast. I mean, sometimes before that, I guess I'll say hi to the girls in the morning. And
by the way, I love that as a habit, and it's something that we've even done together. Tell me about how you kind of like why you decided to combine sort of working out with the people that you work with, because I think
I mean, I think it's a positive thing in general. It's a good way to get to know somebody, and it's a good way to kind of build a connection. Frankly, it's also just necessary. My schedule is so busy that it's just an extra meeting that I can fit in that I couldn't do otherwise. So it's a good combination. It's a useful thing. Depending on the day, some days it'll be internal meetings, some days it'll be external. I try to keep as much time as I can free to actually think and work. Depending what's going on, like if we're putting together a new fund or helping launch something, there'll probably be a lot of meetings around one of those. I'm actually doing 2 of those right now, actually, a little bit. So it's been keeping me quite busy. And, sometimes there'll be something for media or a podcast or whatnot. Sometimes there'll be a board meeting or 2. I try not to go on boards as much anymore. I'd much rather just help separately versus the boards, but there's still some of them that I have to be on for various reasons. And then oftentimes I'll have a group either for lunch or dinner, some days both. Where we'll hang out, and usually a group we target at something. If it could be a policy thing where we bring over we had the governor of Florida and Elon Musk and a bunch of guys over, to kind of do policy, but also chat about fun stuff. Sometimes it's for a specific industry we're working on, where a bunch of guys from logistics thing are in town, or a bunch of guys for a healthcare thing are in town, or we'll get a meal with a leader of a health system and some of my team to talk about something. But usually what we're doing is, it's a combination of internal meetings, external meetings, and time to write and think. And it's very important to protect time to write and think. I'm not always as good at that as I should be, but I do my best.
Yeah. How much time do you carve out to do the writing and thinking, or how do you make sure that it doesn't get scheduled?
I'm probably going to be a lot more difficult to reach starting really soon, because I'd like to have 2 to 2.5 days a week to do that. And I haven't had that, especially with the young girls. My readings kind of suffer because I spend more time with the girls, which is important because it's important to see your young kids. And a lot of people are just used to be able to reach me, and they're pretty important people, and they're used to be able to reach me. I'm probably going to just make it so they're not able to reach me anymore pretty soon, because it's starting to feel a little too much. So I'm still figuring it out. I don't think there's any I think the answer is in life is there's no final exact way of doing things. I think it keeps evolving depending where you are in your career. Because I've had a lot of success recently, there's just a lot more random billionaires trying to constantly reach out to me, and I probably need to just actually be less available to that. It's just the nature of it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think saying no is probably one of the hardest things in the world, but it's almost like necessary to protect your time and your.
It's very difficult. It's funny. They all want to talk now. They all have a SPAC. I think I've been contacted by about 60 people with SPACs that they didn't really want to say no to taking their call. But I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one of the valuable nuggets that I got out of what you just said, though, is it sounds like you really like to kill two birds with one stone, whether it's working out with the people that you're meeting with or during these lunches and dinners. Obviously, we got to engage in our self care, but you can kind of like do both at the same time, which I think is actually like a useful strategy for folks. Is not thinking about them as being mutually exclusive.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, it's good to be more efficient and productive with your time. It's also good to have open free time. But if you're busy trying to get things done, you should combine stuff. You should bring more people together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk a little bit actually about the fitness side of things because I think one of the other unique things when I kind of came into AVC was seeing that sometimes you even work out together as a firm, which I've never seen before. So tell me a little bit about how you kind of infuse health and fitness even into the organization.
Yeah, well, I think we were doing various boot camp for a while together in San Francisco with the team when we were all there, and that was definitely a fun thing. A lot of the team would come to it. Um, definitely had meetings where we go hike or we go do something active and chat, and it's just a great way. My mind works better when I have a workout that day. So
Absolutely. Do you follow a particular workout routine or philosophy in terms of like cardio, strength training, etc.?
not really. I do a mix of everything. I have Peloton. I run a lot. Do push-ups and pull-ups. So, and then just other. Sometimes I'll do my wife's video. She always has these funny 30-minute videos and stuff she does. So, mix of things for me.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe that's the secret right there is just doing whatever works and getting a little diversity in there so it doesn't get boring.
I think that's right.
Excellent. Do you have other sort of health, strategies that you follow, whether it's on the nutritious side or how much you try to sleep, et
It's a
cetera?
funny to talk about health with after I got the vaccine and my head's all messed up here. It's whatever. I guess that was good for me for my health, but just not temporarily in the short term. I these take certain medications. I've gone off metformin for now because I found it really stopped my muscle growth a little bit. And I didn't love it, but I probably should be doing that again sometimes. Um, I take some of the omega-3 and B vitamins and stuff. Um, I tend to try to eat pretty healthy, and then when I don't for a few days because of something, I'll go back and I might do kind of like these fasts every once in a while to try to stay healthy. But it's an area that I care about. My wife's very healthy, and so we're smart about what we do with food around the house. But it's not something I spend a ton of time thinking about.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think if I'm correct, you're kind of alluding to sort of metformin, which is a classic sort of diabetes medication, has been often repurposed these days as almost like an anti-aging longevity medication.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's good for you for anti-aging, and there's interesting evidence there. So yeah, it's probably not a bad thing, especially if you don't work out that much. You probably should be taking it. I work out enough. At least my interpretation is it's not necessarily as useful, but I'd bias towards whatever you think. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, and half the country is insulin resistant anyway. So ironically, for the glycemic purposes, probably is beneficial for most people. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this field because obviously AVC does a lot of investing in not only health tech but bio. What do you sort of see as kind of like the future of health optimization? So not just using drugs like metformin for the treatment of diseases like diabetes, but to have better, more optimal, healthier, longer lives.
Well, it's obvious, because there's this renaissance going on in biology. We're just learning so much more about how cells work than we ever knew before, and learning so much more about how aging works. I think we still don't know why. There's this whole crazy, creepy thing where like young blood put into someone will make them younger. And there's lots of new research on stuff like that, parabiosis, I guess, right? There's lots of research on stuff like that. And I think it's gonna be very interesting to be able to detect what are the things in your blood that are causing aging and how can you address those in a way that's healthy. And there's a question, is there a trade-off between aging and cancer? And you can't address these things without causing more cancer, or are there simple things you could program and fix in your body? And I don't think people know yet, but there's probably going to be all sorts of ways that you can monitor. Like one obvious thing you want to monitor is, are there cancer cells floating around in your blood? And there's companies like Real and Guardant Health and others take a little bit of your blood and they can tell you if you have stage 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 cancer. And just doing that every once in a while, obviously, will be a great thing to monitor and optimize to fix if there's a problem there. And there's probably all sorts of scans like that for other things that you should be doing and fixing and and before it become a bigger problem. So I mean, there's just it's hard for me to know exactly what's going to come up with optimization. Most of what we tend to work on right now is infrastructure for the Renaissance in bio. So it's the tools helping engineer cells. It's the tools helping sort cells for cell therapy. It's there's all sorts of other more complicated ways which you can enable CRISPR, and which you can have platforms that deliver packets of mRNA. Right? If you get the exosomes to be done in more sophisticated ways, there's all sorts of new therapies coming there that you can create. So there's all sorts of kind of conceptual infrastructure for the space that I'm very bullish on. I think the sky's the limit in terms of how it works. Like, I mean, as we understand life perfectly, we can engineer anything. So it's going to be pretty awesome what that means for our health.
Yeah, I think we're just at the tipping point, to your point about the Renaissance. And it is very exciting to see, because I think even with some of the infrastructure, just like, for instance, like doing routine blood testing is a giant headache. And being able to do that, faster, more efficiently, more consumer friendly, will allow us to have the data to routinely, whether it's check cancer or kind of see changes, in our biology over time, and be able to do the optimization in the first place.
Yep.
Very cool. Is there a particular segment or field that you're most excited about? Like if you almost like look into your crystal ball in the next 5, 10, 20 years, like, is there something that's going to radically change in terms of health that you're willing to bet on or help build?
Well, there's just all these really promising ways to treat cancer, and to program the immune system, and to program the body to treat it. So I think we're going to actually cure a lot of cancers the next decade. I'd be really surprised if we didn't. That's a really big one. I really don't know well enough with brain health what's going on. That does seem to be the last frontier. Is just so much of our body is determined by our brain health and by how our brain interacts with our body, and that's something that we're studying a lot. I'd love to see us make a lot more progress there. I don't know it well enough, but I think it's a really important area to figure out. And then there's just all sorts of ways in which we can program cells in the body that do different things. I think there's probably a lot of different diseases of the nervous system, and things like multiple sclerosis, or there's things like Alzheimer's, where we're really understanding how these receptors work that cause these problems, and they're understanding ways to program and interact with them to have them not cause the problems anymore. So I feel like over the next 10 years, assuming we continue to have billions of dollars invested in these areas, and we don't break the kind of like government research plus private market investment and entrepreneurship, if those both keep happening the right way, it's pretty obvious to me we're gonna cure a lot of these things.
Yeah, I'm very excited and bullish about that as well, because I think a lot of these things, like Alzheimer's, for instance, we haven't come up with good solutions because maybe we've been trying traditional, single molecule, drug targeting, and it needs a more robust approach to really understand the
you need to be able to program. You need to be able to program life. You need to be able to engage with it in a much more sophisticated way, which we're just starting to learn how to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So we talked a lot about sort of, your health practices, some of the technologies that may enable further optimization in the future. Let's talk a little bit about the productivity side of things. Because your schedule is so busy and so varied, I'd love to hear a little bit about, your experiences in terms of how do you optimize your productivity and your recovery?
Yeah, one of the things that's changed for me in the last several years is I feel like when I was younger, I would just sprint on stuff, and then I would just like fall asleep, and then I would get up and sprint on stuff again and fall asleep. And I don't know if it's because I'm more aware of it now, or because I actually just need longer mental recovery phases. But there's I actually run out of mental bandwidth to solve hard problems after 10 or 12 or 14 hours sometimes now, which is, it sounds a little silly, but it's just like there's, and I guess there's probably a lot more I'm managing. If you're like the empire of stuff we've started 20 companies that I helped found, and there's 100 companies we've invested in. So just a lot of stuff going on.
Sure.
And it's there's only so much bandwidth you naturally have, and you have to really get other people to own things and specialize. And when you work on these problems, you have to be aware when you're starting to flag, and do something to refresh yourself. And it's really healthy not only have exercise, but to have different forms of downtime, different forms of games, and other things that you enjoy that distract yourself and help you kind of replenish yourself. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on taking downtime. I work way too hard, but I'm aware of the fact that I need breaks in the day sometimes, and I need to be aware of whether or not my mind is ready to go fully and solve the hardest problem right now, or if I need to come back to it in the morning or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's something that's underappreciated. Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz have a great book called The Power of Full Engagement, where their thesis is the secret to productivity is managing energy, not time. So they're definitely aligned with this, you know,
Being
thesis.
conscious of your energy and how you use it, and again, just being a lot more strict about engaging in certain things that need you to engage in and not engage in. You need to be strategic about what are the key things I need to be engaging in.
Absolutely. So I know earlier in our conversation, you talked about, some of these little bit more fixed factors, right? The smartest people, highest IQs, things that are a little bit more inheritable that we cannot change. What are some of the factors that you think people can work on and change and modify within themselves that will help them be more successful?
Well, I think learning to take pleasure in the success of those around you, and to seek it, and to work on it, and to learn, and to give, and to actually enjoy giving. That's really important. I think people who can't do that, there's like a natural cap on them in life, and for most of them, I think that's one. Um, I think I think choosing to be a high integrity person is one, so that you can. That's I'm not an expert on why people are high integrity or not, but really making that choice, I think, is really important. And I know I see a lot of people who are very difficult, who are kind of always have a secret motive for themselves, and it's not that they're breaking the law necessarily, but you just don't, you just can't trust them. So so that's a key thing. Um, there's probably a lot of just work ethic, and why you work hard, and who you are, and having your narrative be a positive narrative, that involves, your identity is tied into your integrity and your hard work, and it's something that's a positive thing. I think it's just really important to have in your brain in the right way. I think that people can kind of map that out and fix it. It probably takes a lot of self awareness to get to the point you fix that if it's wrong, but I think you need to be successful.
For sure. Do you think work ethic can be cultivated in adulthood? It seems like it's something that often like they're either born with, or maybe they got it through their parents.
Oh, I think it's a habit. I think it's a habit for sure. I think it could be easily cultivated, not easily, but it could be cultivated. It could be lost. You
Yep.
know, it's both, and it's definitely a habit that you want to create. It's probably healthy sometimes to lose it. I'm probably not very good. I've probably been working too hard and redlining for too long,
Uh-huh.
but in some ways, but in other ways, it's like, it is. If you take off too much too much time, sometimes it's hard to get back. Um, but no, it's definitely something you can build, and you can decide to build. Obviously, people have advantages based on how they're brought up in their childhood, but I don't think it's impossible for anybody to do it.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions I'm always curious and fascinated about billionaires in particular is, it would be very easy to take the gas off the pedal. Obviously, you've achieved, at least some modicum of success, at least financially.
Success is definitely one of the very big challenges in life, which is like, there's no one's going to play a little tiny violin for me, but it is one of the biggest challenges in life, because it becomes a lot harder. It becomes a lot harder to then keep pushing and keep doing really big things. And every time you have bigger success, it allows you to achieve more, but it also gives you more of an excuse to take the day off, and to stop building the next thing.
Totally. So, yeah. So I guess that's my question is whether you're a millionaire, billionaire, or whatever the thing is that you hoped for. How do you maintain your motivation and work ethic?
Well, I always planned to be a billionaire from a young age. I guess I'm a pretty confident guy, so it doesn't really change me that much. The question is not becoming a billionaire or becoming a bigger billionaire. The question is like, what are the things you want to fix? What are the things you want to build? And what are the things you want to achieve? And there's just a lot of stuff in our society that's very broken right now. There's a lot of stuff that's very naive. There's a lot of people taking the wrong approach that to help people and help fix these things. And so I see it with Sister Institute. I see it with my work and building, companies. Like last year we brought over $1 billion together to start, producing an advanced biomanufacturing company that's obviously doing relevant things right now with gene therapy and mRNA. And there's just a lot of things like this that, because of where I am, I'm able to work on these things, and I'm able to then take the financial resources that creates and then do even bigger things next time. And it's very satisfying to build and to create and to solve these problems. And we're getting laws passed in 8 states with Cicero. As I create more financial resources, and I inspire more people and pass even more laws to help more people. So there's a lot of cool stuff like this that it's fun to keep doing. And it really is exponential growth, where you got to keep working on it. And so it's one of those things where, like, the longer you can actually keep in the game and keep executing well, like every year you can do as much as every other year before, pretty much, because these things grow so quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can hear the passion come across when you talk about, these things that are so important to you. And maybe that's a little bit of the answer to your question, or my question, I should say, is, in ACT, we sort of differentiate between goals and values. A goal might be a billionaire, but a value might be something enduring, which is, how can I make long-standing societal impact? And I think that obviously continues to fuel you, and it's done great for our American society as well.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think it'd be a healthier thing if there are more people who had kind of the dutiful approach. I think there's a lot of people who've made a lot of money, and the reason they made a lot of money is they're very good just focusing only on the thing they were doing. And unfortunately, they still have that mindset even once they're there, and that's very frustrating to me because there's so many other ways that could be creating value using their skills to help everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that focus on duty. That is something that's definitely, I think, lost. And maybe it's because American society is so new. There isn't like this long-standing intergenerational tradition of sort of.
Well, I think we had it pretty strongly in the 19th century, and we had it pretty strongly in the mid 20th century. I think there's something about the culture that's unfortunately changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, fair enough. Well, maybe we got to bring it back.
Yep. Well, we need more role models doing it right and showing people. So we'll figure out what we can do there.
Absolutely. So beyond sort of productivity, because obviously Silicon Valley's productivity success, maybe an area that people are talk less about, but I think is just as important, is happiness and satisfaction. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, how have you sort of found happiness and satisfaction in your life? How do you maintain a good mentality about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, I mean, winning with friends, winning with family, being close to friends and family. I mean, one of the things I really thought was fun is when we started Palantir, I gave a bunch of my shares to each of my kind of 25 cousins, 19 on my dad's side and 6 on my mom's side, and our people in the family. Not enough to be a giant amount, but Palantir's done so well that it's been worth a good amount, enough to change the lives of all of them. And that was kind of a fun thing. It made me happy to do that, and being able to spend time with my girls, with my wife, with my brother lives here in Austin. My other brother's going to move here. We have a game night tonight. Like, just that kind of stuff is just really fun, and just being able to help others succeed around me. When I've had a series of chiefs of staff who are, they already start off as really bright people, but I train them in how we think about business, and they help me get a bunch of things done. And a lot of them have gone on to build really important companies, to become very successful CEOs, both men and women. And that's something it's very fun to have people who helped you a lot and you won together, and to see them winning big. And it's just those sorts of things are just, there's a lot of satisfaction in those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's incredibly inspirational in terms of you're training the next generation of leaders. Are there particular things in that you've tried to impart into your chief of staffs that have helped them be so successful?
It's interesting. I think probably the way we think about the world, the way we ask questions, the way we look to look really deeply to see how the world should work versus how it does in really clear ways. Maybe something about our work ethic, maybe something about how we try to add value to people around us, to create mutual benefit, and engage people on that plane, which really gets a lot of the best people to coordinate with you in the right way and to want to see you win. I'd be interested to ask them what they think. I hadn't really spent much time on that and thinking about it openly. I think there's a lot of things we do that are very intuitive and that you've built up over time through intuition. Sure. And then it's kind of fun to see some of that get picked up, by the young people that you work with.
For sure. Yeah. By the way, it's one of an interest of mine is the sort of the use of intuition, because, as a psychologist, you have to be a blend of intuitive and scientific. How do you sort of use intuition in the work that you do? For instance, like in making an investment decision versus being super analytical about it?
Most of the best investors I know are ultimately relying on their intuition and then trying to justify it with logic, is my experience. I think your intuition gets better because you build quantitative models.
Yep.
And because you really learn the details and really go deep on metrics and competitors and everything else. But I mean, the best venture investing, especially, and I think it's probably true in other areas, but especially in venture investing, you really can't quantify that something's going to work. You have to understand the people. You have to understand the industry. You have to understand like their approach. You have to understand how things are evolving, and you got to build up intuition over time. And so yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like Peter Thiel, who I worked very closely with for a long time, and who I still see sometimes as a friend. He's very logical, and he'll create these very interesting logical constructs. But my experience with him is he's actually acting on intuition, and then he's justifying it through super high IQ later on. But anyway, I don't know if you'd agree with that, but that's my view of it.
Yeah, no, it sort of fits cognitive psychology really well as well. In a lot of ways, I always say intuition, even though I'm a big believer in it, is basically unconscious pattern recognition, right? And it is basically a model that we train in our brains over time. So, like for instance, if you're a good judge of character, which is a very like touchy feely thing, probably comes from seeing a lot of people who are on the good and maybe worse side of certain personality spectrums, and you're like, oh, that seems familiar, so I should either hire or stay away from that kind of person. So
Yep, the building up intuition for people, for businesses, for all sorts of little things we encounter is really key. It makes us better at what we do.
for sure, yeah. And it's interesting you kind of mentioned that you had some of these goals very early on, and obviously you've gone on to achieve them. But hindsight's also
I haven't achieved all my goals.
that's true. Yeah, that's why you're still striving.
I just retire.
Sure. But I'm curious if you could, one of the favorite questions I have for people, if you could go back and give advice to your younger self, what would you say, and at what age would you give it?
It's always really hard because the counterexample is impossible to know.
Sure.
There's a part of me that wishes I was very, very intense in my early 20s and mid 20s.
Hmm.
And I was basically working two jobs with the hedge fund and everything there and Palantir for a while. And even a Palantir, pulling just insane hours and getting everyone else to skip weekends for years. Um, I feel like kind of a little bit of a, I see how that was a little bit nasty in retrospect, having a young family now, of course, because it's a lot easier for a 24-year-old kid to skip weekends several times in a row than it is for somebody with young kids or something like that.
Right.
But it's hard because there's a lot of wisdom I didn't have. But if I wasn't working as hard as I was, things might not have turned out the same
Right.
way. And there are people in my life who I wish I could have been smarter about not including in my life. And there are people who I wish I could have spent even more time with, who were important people in my life that some of them are no longer with us, that I wish I'd gotten to know better. Because so there's a lot of wisdom you gain over the years. I'm very lucky where I am, where I'd argue you could say I've done too many things. I've started so many things, but if I hadn't started so many things, then I wouldn't have. It's most. I guess I'm lucky. A lot of them, in my case, most of them have worked out. So it's just really hard to know the counterfactual. Like I probably could have done like a few less things and had a bit more open time in my life for people close to me, especially in my 20s.
Hmm.
But it's just that I might not have ended up getting to where I am. So it's a really hard thing to figure out. I definitely am biased to spending a lot more time with my kids and my family and my friends and making sure I take that time in a way I didn't when I was younger.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And one of the things is even though we say that sort of values are enduring, particularly in psychology, I do think they mature and change over time as you kind of go through the life changes. And obviously, having a family puts you in a different place and might reshuffle priorities as they should. So
Yep.
I think that does make a lot of sense. Um, Perhaps a little bit more concretely, do you have a failure that you're willing to talk about, and something that you learned about it?
Well, in 2008, I was trying to do a lot of things at once. I have a new rule, which is that I'm only responsible for the failure of one thing at a time. So
I
if there's
love that rule.
something else, there may be someone else who's responsible for it going forward. And I was trying to build a quant fund at a Aquarium or a hedge fund. Had some really cool things we were doing that were just starting to work. And I was, running this business at Palantir on the finance side, which had a very different strategy than the rest of the company. And there's going to be some politics around it. This was 13 years ago now. And, I was doing the trading and the macro side and helping out with a bunch of things. And there got to be some politics in my orgs I didn't know about. I was supporting someone to run one of the orgs, and that person was really, really getting on the nerves of a few people. And those people all got together and went and complained about me and the person. And I didn't even know that they were annoyed because I was so busy. I hadn't taken the time to check in properly with them. And there was just all these politics and all this stuff. And it was just like a total mess. And we ended up having to close down some of this quant fund stuff that I still think was just about to make a lot of money. It was pretty exciting. And, it's probably not the best use of my time to do quant fund stuff anyway, but it was something I learned a lot from. And I guess there's a few different things. And that was the year I lost my mom, so I was a little bit off in a sense that I was, and obviously it was emotionally I wasn't as strong as I could have been that year, but I just realized it's really important that you have people around you know really well when you're doing things, and that you don't take responsibility for everything. You can only take responsibility for the failure of one thing at a time, and it's trying to do too much at once is actually you get a lot less done. And it's also really important to have loyal people around you, and to make sure you have high integrity people around you. I think for me, it was important that I controlled my own destiny versus being subject to the whims of others, because politics gets really crazy. And so trying to do multiple things at once and then not even controlling any of them because there are more senior people around me, that's obviously a very bad situation. So I have not put myself in that situation again.
Yeah. And I think it's such a great lesson for whether it's the CEOs that are listening to this or the aspiring CEOs or business owners in the future. Is it's very easy to be, along with the work ethic that we talked about, to be tempted to be responsible for so many different things. But I
Yeah,
really think that the mark of a good CEO is to, quite frankly, make yourself replaceable, and that you shouldn't be
100,
contingent on.
100%. So that's very well said. Every great leader's job is to figure out how to replace themselves, and then that way they can do something new and add more value. So whenever you're doing something, how do you replace yourself, and then that gets you to the next step. That's what everyone should be doing. That a lot of people who lack confidence don't want to replace themselves because they're afraid there'll be nothing for them to do.
Right.
But for competent leaders, it's the way to go.
Absolutely. You mentioned sort of the politics, and I think is people almost see it as an inevitable, as especially companies scale quickly or grow to a certain size, and you do run into difficult, personalities. How do you think about that trade-off in that oftentimes in these companies, you're trying to get the best, brightest, most technically brilliant talent, but that often does come with whether it's personality quirks or politics or other sort of challenges and dealing with that trade-off.
Yeah, it's tough. I had a no asshole rule at Palantir, and there were a few really talented people we just eliminated that I think was for the best. There's like a tough thing where like, yeah, he's an asshole, but he's our asshole, and he's a genius, and we need him. And it's just like, depending on the org, and if that's your only A+ asshole, maybe you can't afford to fire him because everyone else is an A-, and that's tough. It's a tough place to be in. In general, it's better not to have the asshole. Things work better. You'll figure it out. Is my view, how these things evolve over time. But yeah, trying like as much as possible. Just when people come to you with things, like trying to make it transparent. A lot of leaders, they're really good at some things. They're not as good at handling politics. I think what's really important as a leader when these things come up is to not just to like force people to talk to each other's faces, force everything to be out in the open. Don't let people say things behind people's backs. Don't let people complain to you without the other person hearing it and talking about it. And really just get things out in the open as quickly as possible is really important, and figure out, are these people actually aligned with the organization? Are they good stewards of the organization? Or is someone playing games here that's not going to work out?
Yeah, it's such a great rule of thumb. I know Ray Dalio practices a kind of a radical version of that, in terms of transparency at Bridgewater. And it's kind of a principle of psychology as well. So I still train psychiatry residents an hour a week at UCSF. And it's funny, like they'll talk about, issues with their patients. And one of the first questions I always repeatedly ask is, well, have you talked about this with your patient? Because I was like, if you talked about it with me, then you almost certainly have to talk about it with them.
This is my biggest pet peeve in a venture fund, is when we have like someone doing a pitch, and then I ask for any questions and no one asks a question. And then afterwards someone's like, well, I think this is their problem. I'm like, why didn't you say that and give them a chance to answer it? It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Fair enough. Well, that's something I guess you can train. One of the things I was particularly interested in talking to you about is masculinity, because I remember actually, in fact, when we were, doing the investment, one of the things you mentioned is you're like, oh, I totally get what you're doing because I talk about it all the time, in terms of my Facebook friends and my own community. The issue of sort of like masculinity is kind of near and dear to you. So I'd love to hear kind of your take on sort of masculinity and sort of modern masculinity, toxic masculinity, what it's become today.
Yeah, well, I think there's obviously a lot of positive traits of men, and there's a lot of strengths. Men naturally, they're more protective. There's pride in their strength and their ability to protect and to provide. There's they're more likely to kind of like clash with other men and get in a fight, but then be friends afterwards. And it's, I think it's a normal thing. It's like much more direct. Obviously, there's certain types of, certain types of spatial intelligence, certain types of competitive interests, certain types of needs to want to be the best of things that are inherently more masculine traits, which obviously makes sense for sociobiological reasons. And I think people should be proud to be men and should be proud to be strong and proud to be providers and proud to be defenders and proud to be this masculine force. And our society is very weird. There's some toxic aspects of some of these things, but there's also some toxic aspects of anything in the world. There's positive and negatives for anything. Like the world's full of dialectics, and it's very strange how we've been programmed to only see the negatives in our generation. There's a lot of men who are not doing as well as women overall. Even though men do run the very top, like the top 1% of a lot of industries, there's a lot more men. There's also a lot more men at the bottom 1% of a lot of places. There's a lot more men in prison. There's a lot more men having problems. There's a lot more men where things don't really work out in schools right now. Obviously, it's the school's been designed where it doesn't really make sense for little boys because they naturally want to run around and have energy and speak up and speak out and cause trouble. And our civilized society kind of demonizes a lot of this right now. So,
absolutely,
I think it's good for people to be proud of their masculinity. I think that men and women are not the same. It's possible for women to do almost anything. It's possible for men to do almost anything, but the averages are very different. Mm-hmm. You're going to have some fields that are going to be 70 or 80% men, and that's okay. And you're going to have some fields that will be 70 or 80% women, and that's okay because men and women are different. And like this whole kind of religion that says everything should be the same and it says there's no difference is very strange to me.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I was talking to someone who's at a consumer like feminine hygiene / cosmetics company, female founders. The company's 95% female. It's definitely not 50-50. Partly, I think they hire more women, and partly because I think people are more passionate, obviously, if you can relate to the product. And I was like, you know what? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. People should work on what is meaningful to them. But it's an interesting double standard. If you have a men's company, then people might poo-poo the fact that you're not totally equal. So
yeah, and the whole culture of everything, like what are we going to do as a society to get this to 50-50? Because it's not right if it's not 50-50. And like, no, you actually just have a low IQ and you're stupid and you don't understand common sense. Like that's actually the situation here. Is that 50-50 is not the right answer because people are different, and on average, people make different choices. It's like the World Chess Championship is like all top 100 right now are men. Like, is that because our society is sexist? No, like men are more interested in that type of thing. And they're more interested in competing in that type of thing and spending hundreds of hours antisocially on it to learn it. Because that's just on average what more men are willing to do. And is there some bias that then develops that causes more men to do it? Of course, because men are already naturally more interested in it. Therefore, more men are going to go as part of it. So it's just a lack of common sense on these things drives me crazy.
Yep. Yeah, and I think this is something that I publicly talk about as well. Is like it's unfortunate that we can't even dialogue about these things, or if there's any notion that to say that there's differences between the sexes, which clearly, if you're from a scientific perspective, I think it's indisputable.
I love all these people who have these signs that say follow the science, but as soon as the science is not politically correct, they ignore it. That's what's going on. As soon as the science says the teachers unions are wrong, they ignore it. As soon as the science says men and women are different, they're like, well, follow the science, but I don't like that one. Let's just brush that under the rug and pretend the science doesn't. It's crazy,
Yeah, or you get labeled as a hyphenist, whatever it is, and it shuts down the conversation.
Well, I have 3 young daughters, and they're going to be extremely successul. And some of them might want to be businesswomen, some of them might want to be moms, and whatever they want to do, I'm going to support them. And but what I don't want is a world in which if they do want to be a businesswoman, that they're seen as a token because someone's put a dumb rule in that there has to be a woman on these boards, and therefore the women there everyone knows are tokens, which is what's happening right now. Is you had great women on boards that deserve to be there, and now you're like shifting it in a way which is like you have to almost assume until you meet the woman that she might be a token, she might be just unqualified, which is just so unfair.
Yeah, it definitely kind of ironically steals their power.
It's very unfair for the most. I have some amazingly competent women I work with on boards. And a lot of them are very frustrated by this too. It's just obviously it's goofy because it devalues them because they'd be there anyway.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. On the topic of masculinity, I'd love to hear your take on what makes a great man. I think you've touched on all throughout our conversation a couple of the virtues, right? You mentioned courage, you mentioned integrity, You mentioned work ethic. You mentioned loyalty. So those are the four so far. Is there anything else that you think, a young man listening to this in terms of their personal development should work on in terms of like virtues or of masculinity?
I think the four classical virtues are really important. Courage is the one that's most lacking in our society right now. The other four classical virtues are temperance, justice, and wisdom. And those are all useful things to spend time building and thinking about. Obviously the three religious virtues are faith, charity, and hope, and those are important to me as well. Although I don't talk about those as much in public, 'cause that's something we don't really engage in publicly too much. We do a lot of that privately. But I think faith, charity, and hope are also, as part of being a well-rounded person and being a well-developed person, is very important. And a man is courageous, and he takes his job to plan for the future. It's his job to take care of those around him. It's his job to plan for bad scenarios where if something bad were to happen, he would still be able to take care of his family, or his family would still be able to take care of themselves. That's part of a masculine virtue, and his friends as well. And so a man's ready for unexpected circumstances. He knows how to defend himself. He knows how to defend his family. He doesn't trust others to handle those things for him. He doesn't trust the government to handle those things for him. I think it's very important to be masculine. I think it's very beta. It's very different to assume that there's going to be someone else handling these things for you. So those are some. I guess those are some of the ideas I'd put out.
And I think your point earlier about men protecting and providing. One of the interesting things whenever I talk about sort of masculine versus feminine virtues, people are like, "Oh, well, can't women do that, or can't men do that?" And you're like, "Of course."
Yeah, no, there's some women who are more masculine than some men. Of course,
it's true.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, but I think that the answer is it's what does society reinforce? I think obviously just more value to reinforce by society, probably for good reason. And so
probably because they're more naturally inherent, more on average in those backgrounds. But there are definitely exceptions to every rule.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we're in an interesting age where people can kind of be and do whatever it is that they want to do. But maybe some of the tradition, or these, as you said, classical virtues, probably they've been around for thousands of years for a good reason. Definitely. Do you have any suggestions, by the way, on how folks can cultivate it? Maybe, for instance, faith is one way. Maybe starting a company is a way of cultivating some of these traits. I'm curious if someone is listening to this and is like, okay, awesome, now I have the blueprint, the roadmap, but how can I actually work on it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think you have to pick things that matter to you, that you want to help with, and that you want to do, whether it's mentoring in your community, whether it's building a company, whether it's working on a cause, or raising awareness of a cause that you feel strongly about, whether it is faith or whether it is taking care of people around you. I'm definitely not an expert on that. That's something I need to think more about. I'm very lucky to have a wonderful family and to have a great team and great companies I'm working on. So I kind of have a natural outlets for these things, and we do a lot of philanthropy in the background. I think an interesting question is, you've had success, is what can you do to go out of your way to help that you might not have done otherwise, or might not have been your responsibility 15, 20 years ago. When the ice week hit Texas a couple weeks ago, my partners and I figured out how to get, several very big trucks full of like 500,000 bottles of water, like all shipped all around the state right away, because they were running out of water in a bunch of cities, and we figured out with the governor's office where they needed them, and that was a very fun thing to do. It was very satisfying to be able to give back in that way. So just going out of your way to figure out, in different times when people are in need, what can I do to play a part of the solution? It's always a good question to ask.
Yeah, and that's an amazing story, and I'm sure it helped the community tremendously. But I love that adage. Sometimes I think there's this notion of I think someone called it finding yourself, right? That you need to go away for a period of time and work on these things in isolation, when, I think in a lot of ways, these virtues are almost part of what I call everyday enlightenment, that as you
I think they are everyday life, and they're habits, and there's something to think about and challenge yourself about, but there are habits, and and we all fail at different times with temperance. Sometimes I'll have days where I drink too much, or do something, do too much, do too much of a good thing. And sometimes we don't pay enough attention to some of these things, but you should gotta keep trying to do better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think life is hard enough, quite frankly, as it is, that when you're working on hard problems and you're working with good people, you'll naturally have opportunities to practice a lot of these virtues if you're paying attention to them and be like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to, practice my temperance, to your point, or my generosity, or whatever it is, and to take and reflect on those
Definitely.
opportunities.
And there's a lot of people who think a lot more about these than me. I mean, I think Ryan Holiday on his stoicism, there's just a lot of clever ways to practice virtues that he's come up with. So I'm not an expert, but I would definitely would read other things too about this.
For sure. Well, the fact that I think that you know those virtues off the top of your head, you hold them near and dear to your heart, and I certainly think you've done a great job of practicing them in how community oriented and generous you are with your team, your family, and your communities. I certainly think of you as a role model to myself, to the company, and to the world at large. So we're very, very happy to have had you here as a guest on the Maximus podcast. We're very blessed to have you as an investor and supporter of our company. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story and being a good masculine role model.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. You guys are doing great work. I'm proud to be involved.
Thank you very much.